Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 5, which I'm calling Innovate or Die. It's not because I completely believe in that, but it is a quote that is widely used in circles about technology. The chapter that I had you read was called The Future of Social Media Measurement and Management. Here are a few thoughts that I had about the chapter. I do want you to read the chapter and grab some of the concepts, but I want to make sure that you listen to my critical view of what the chapter is about. The first thing I'll share is that innovation on the internet is more than data. It's oftentimes about deregulation. So one of the first things that I noticed in my work as a graduate student was the impact of Wikipedia on higher education and education settings. So I'm going to read this quote. Nearly every internet-enabled student depends on Wikipedia these days, to the dismay of many educators. Venerable study aids like Cliff Notes summaries look like creaky wooden carts next to the supersonic jetliner that is Wikipedia. But Wikipedia's radical working model and uneven quality have resulted in it being banned for use in citations by a number of colleges and universities, and there is continual academic debate about the scholarly value of an encyclopedia put together by ordinary, uncredentialed common folk. So when we look at what is happening with big data, in the last module I cited The Economist magazine saying that nearly 90% of the world's data that has been captured in the last 2 years. That is an astonishing claim by that magazine. But big data has reinvigorated automated auction mechanisms, opportunities for crowdsourcing, and opportunities for deregulated globalization. So the internet, in a lot of ways, was designed for deregulation. It was designed to let people say what they wanted to say, to make contributions from wherever they wanted to make contributions, to cut out the perennial, traditionally referred to middleman. So some of the thoughts that I had in here were how Wikipedia sank the Britannica. It used to be that somebody would go around, it was typically a male, a salesman would go knocking on door to door, and I remember the excitement of the possibility of getting a whole row of encyclopedias, and you'd get one letter at a time, and you could look up sort of the claimed world's knowledge in these books. Well, Wikipedia came along, and Encyclopedia Britannica salespeople were just literally dying. Like, the sales were just devastating. It was a devastating occurrence for sales. The Britannica has since raised their ship from it being sunk by Wikipedia, but people were getting things for free and just through crowdsourcing. And there are, I would argue, auction mechanisms used to do that. Amazon is essentially an auction mechanism, and they're able to create opportunities within the supply chain. So if somebody had a certain distribution area locked in with a distributor, people couldn't really find or shop for anything, but Amazon had this idea of the long tail. You could find virtually anything, and all of a sudden those obscure things, that was a market because you could still keep it in stock, so to speak, online and refer to it through search engines. The Uberization of everything. You can do casual work. You can work whenever you want, however you want, but it is going to be in a competitive environment. Microtasks were sent out on the internet. So somebody in a foreign country whose currency was not very good. People could buy things for pennies on the dollar and have you complete those tasks, things like editing or illegal essays, all these types of things. And then basically you're getting down to this idea of deregulated auctions have become sort of the new form of regulation. So you've got so much data, you can't have a person sitting there monitoring it. So you automate auctions, whether it's eBay, Amazon, Uber is an auction, Google AdWords, Facebook ads. They all have some kind of auction mechanism. They're fairly easy to program, but they do have many unintended consequences. So in the chapter, they talk about data science. So they talk about tech entrepreneurship on the Silicon Valley. They talk about thought leader Todd Murphy, same rules, new tools. Thought leader Matt Tompkins, from TV to the web, Omaha Live. So it was sort of a smaller TV show that was able to use deregulation and the internet to make something happen that was very local. Messenger and bot sequences. And then it ends with a case study where they're doing an Extra Life fundraising campaign, and they talk a little bit about useful tools. I'm not necessarily going to cover those, so you do need to read the textbook, and I may ask you a few general questions about those case studies just to see if you got some of the general concepts there. Mainly what you need to do to be strong at anything in life is you need to learn how to learn. And people say that's what you get when you come to university. So this is a graphic put together by one of my students in my course Ways of Doing. And this is how she felt when she came into my class. She felt like the concrete experience. She was kind of under fire. She was very lost. She felt like a caveman, very primitive. And then as the class progressed, she started to have these reflective observations. Well, what other people are struggling with the material, she thought. Okay, good, I'm not the only one. Other people are having anxieties. Good, I'm not the only one. Or how am I going to navigate these courses? So these course ideas. So people were starting to share this in their peer network, which is why I hold the discussion boards. Next is the abstract conceptualization. Well, I ask you, what does this mean to you? What does this mean to the various peers in the class? What does this look like from your perspective? And then there's active experimentation, and that's where I give you opportunities to try out concepts in media kits, Twitter chats, these types of things in real social media environments. And then you come back to the concrete experience again, and you go through this learning cycle. So as a social media person, you would practice working on the platforms. It's very similar. And then you have these reflective observations. How does this make you feel emotionally? How does this, does this upset you? Does it get you excited? Those little dancing ellipses that they put on there. You're excited. You're getting addicted. You're doing the doom scroll. It keeps scrolling and scrolling. And they use red to show notifications. So there's an insecurity. Oh, I better check this. I don't want them to think I don't like them, or I'm not paying attention, or what must they think of me? Those are some of the reflective observations that you might have. And then you step back and you read a book like this that I've given you for the text, and you have an abstract conceptualization. You start to think, should I be this engaged? Are there other things I could be doing? Is this the key performance indicator that I really want for my life? Is this the mean, or is this the end? And you start to think actively or theoretically about what it is you're doing online. You just binged watched 12 shows on Netflix, and you think, was this really a productive use of my time? Probably not. Next, you get into the active experimentation mode. So how could I better approach the doom scroll? How could I regulate what gets posted on my feed? How could I think conceptually? How do I respond? How is this impacting other people? And you come back to the cycle again. And you may decide that social media is not for you. And you may decide to practice digital abstinence for 1 day a week just to survive and to think more critically about what's going on. So completely remove yourself. So let's come back to this concept of innovate or die. Well, it's a great quote. It kind of says, well, I better innovate because I want to live, right? Most of us want to live. I hope all of you have something exciting to live for. And if not, I hope you reach out to somebody. But let's talk about this concept of innovate or die. It's kind of like this mandate that they set to us. So beware of buzzwords for hire. This was an expression one of my colleagues used when I was at an academic conference, and she kind of elbowed me and she said, "Look out, here comes buzzwords for hire." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, they just use all the current buzzwords so that they can get hired." And, there's really not a lot of content there, but if you're using the buzzwords that people don't really know a lot about, and there's an insecurity in the room about that, it has been used as a strategy to be hired. Beware of unintended consequences, right? So you might think, "Oh, I better innovate." Well, innovation often gives people an economic advantage, which means by default, it gives other people in the community economic disadvantages. So if all of a sudden Amazon is the advantage, now all of your small town shops and your small town retailers, as in your cousins, your friend's parents, your friend, or your shop, is no more. So what is the impact of that on your community as an example? Beware of these new power structures. So who has the power to decide what tweet goes out or what doesn't go out or how it's going to be regulated? How does social media impact your life is a question you should constantly ask yourself. And one of the best ways to do that is to practice digital abstinence. Put your phone down. Warn people that your phone is going to be down for a while. And engage in other activities that are likely healthier for you rather than doom scrolling. Are they measuring what matters to you? So yeah, okay, lots of people like you and you might have lots of likes, but those are just vanity likes. Are those people that would actually go to your funeral, or would they just like your post when you die? Like, that's not a really great measure of a relationship. It's not a great measure of your success. One of the things they talk about is this concept of voice technology. And one of those is, you're going to hear my son probably practicing violin in the background. I'm just going to have to keep on with this lecture because it's just what it is. So anyway, voice technology. So we talk about Alexa, Apple, Siri, Facebook Portal, Google Home. All of these things happen in your house. And those Bluetooth devices are listening. Whether you like it or not, it'd be very easy to hack. And whether or not you own a Bluetooth device matters not, because somebody else nearby likely does. And the Internet of Things has made it so that it's virtually impossible to escape this type of surveillance that is going on. Multimodal discourse analysis, they touch on it a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it here than they do in the textbook. So multimodal discourse analysis talks about sort of the interactions that happen. So interactions could be things like, how rapidly do people respond? What type of sentiment do they have in those interactions? We can also look at things like semiotics. What are the symbols that they use? We talked a little bit about this when we looked at the bad news game, right? So if we have, the different symbols are just rampant in social media. You've got all kinds of emoticons that you can throw in there, and they're kind of like gas on the fire to an emotional post. GIFs or GIFs, whatever you want to call them, also play into that. And so it can really shortcut to an emotion. So oftentimes people will ask, how can these different technologies or concepts be exploited for profit? Other uses could include examining well-being and health alerts. Okay, great. There's Noom, Weight Watchers. I have a former student who came to the University of Windsor, analyzes gestures to monitor whether, or not somebody is physically or mentally well. They can track based on the gestures and the types of responses that you're giving on social. Sounds great until you realize that insurance companies may use that to charge you a different insurance rate. Not you personally, but they may develop demographics and different insurance rates for people in your demographics. That's an issue. Critical discourse analysis, you're going to get a sample of this in the final module. I've actually given you critical discourse analysis, and I'll talk more deeply about that. And this is dissecting the specific words and your approach to your language in your social media posts. Finally, social capital can be measured through your connections. So when you go to apply to something like a board of governors, traditional or an executive board, or to be on an executive board, traditionally the board of governors would be looking at something like, well, what social capital do they bring? Who do they know? What organizations are they connected to? How can those organizations bring economic capital to our organization? So those are also in social media, and they're explicitly laid out on the friends you made on LinkedIn, the friends you have on Facebook, and these things are very easy to check when you apply for a job or to be an executive board member, or if you're even on a dating app, people will look for these types of things. And so this can impact you positively or negatively, and this is one of the concepts that is in the episode Black Mirror that I've asked you to watch on Netflix. Social media and disruption. So social media, that's really what it's all about. It's one big disruption on our social norms. So if you want to be successful in this, you need to know the platform. You need to be on it, using it day to day. You need to have colleagues who use it day to day to get that real life experience. You need to know the costs, the real costs, not, the investment in your personal time, the investment in the equipment you need to have to do these posts, the monthly costs. A lot of times it's free, but it's freemium and it's free for only a month, and then you have to relearn it. So what are the real investments, and what are the real opportunities? Knowing the market is critical. Do you have an opportunity to be part of the market? Do you have the tools to regulate the market? And is there enough profit margin for you to buy the tools you need to understand the market? So that's also critical. So you also want to know how to learn. So something like LinkedIn Learning, or having access to people or experts on YouTube, or knowing where those are. So building that community of peers that can help you find quick information is critical to your success. So in here, you'll notice they talked about Ivy or Ivy Connect. And here you have two students, now graduates. One is an economist, and the other one is a lawyer. Two very good qualities to have if you want to be brand influencers and understand what's going on in social and understand the opportunities. So a lawyer understanding, the regulations, the opportunities for deregulation, an economist who can look at things through a real econometric measurement and know the difference between a vanity measurement and a measurement for engagement, and being able to analyze the markets and how they come and go. So I thought this was, I think the key thing you want to take away here is that they were able to learn social media, and they found the resources to learn social media. They knew how to learn, but they also had a backbone of a discipline in economics and also in law. And so there's a lot of success there. So who has the edge? When we're analyzing brand sentiment, I would say human coders still have the edge. While you might be able to get somebody who can look for a word multiple times, knowing how to search the context of that word still would be somebody who would be an expert in linguistics rather than in computer science. So having a team that has both of those qualities would be integral to your success. So serving the ad and pricing things right, and pricing it right on time. For example, on Amazon, who has the edge there? I think Amazon does, because they own a lot of the plumbing on the internet that makes that happen, or they've at least bought sort of the patented software that makes that happen. So initially when Amazon came on, they were serving up different price points to people. and they swear that they weren't doing this, but clearly they, in my opinion, based on the literature, I think they were. So for example, if I go on there and I make good money, and Amazon knows I make good money because they may have access through their app to my past purchases, how rapidly I click on something, or whether or not I bother to look for a deal, right? So am I the person who traditionally walks into a store, for those of you who do shop for clothing, go right to the back for the sale rack? Right? They see you, so now the salesperson knows that. Well, Amazon knows your click stream, so they can distinguish your past purchases. It might be worthwhile to shop for a book that you need and think about the time you're purchasing that book. If it's late at night, Amazon might know you're desperate and serve up the vendors that offer you more convenience or are charging you more, and you might just rapidly click on it because you want to get it done. But they might also serve up some of the ads, like some of the used ads or the used book ads, for example. So anyway, these are auction type mechanisms that can be automated and can serve up your, what Amazon, I'm using air quotes, would say are your user preferences, whereas a consumer who's concerned about their privacy might say they're being intrusive in their marketing. Understanding value proposition. If you're in social media and you're selling, you need to find value in the supply chain. So cutting costs. Amazon does that. Who is the cheapest person, right? In the supply chain, who is the most available person for an Uber, right? Who lives close to you? So if you share your data, they're going to be able to find that Uber person, Uber driver that lives around the corner. So it is going to arguably save save the environment to a certain extent, rather than having a taxi cab driver come from much further away. Also, the breadth of choices. So this is the example of globalization, where you can have things shipped from anywhere. Amazon, eBay, and Alibaba are good examples of that. Timing, convenience stores, right? They're down the block, or this is the reason you need to get that special latte at every corner in a really large city at multiple coffee shops. Finally, also another price point might be something like affiliation, right? So if you charge a lot of money, or maybe there's only one Bugatti car sold, or 5, or it's custom, and that's why it's expensive, and only somebody with extreme wealth can own this or that type of brand. And social media platforms and internet platforms make this very interesting because, again, you may have distributive regulations in one country, but you may be able to buy a cheap knockoff from another country that is exactly copied because the patent does not apply in another country. However, imagine the possibilities of lining the Internet of Things, voice technology, and wearables. Phones are very personal devices. They're close to you. They're on you all the time. They're even next to you, and they might be able to tell when you're sleeping, when you're not sleeping, how many steps did you take in a day, where did you go. Now we've got COVID contact tracing. These are deeply personal things that you are sharing with complete strangers. Maybe not explicitly or implicitly, and maybe not by design, but hackers, it's very easy to get into your life if you're a hacker. Hackers, what I've learned, are very lazy. They want to find the most efficient way to get the most possible data, or the most possible data out of you as quick as they can with the easiest effort. So still, things like sending a bogus email to 1 million people, at least one person is going to fall for it. And it's very easy to mass produce that. So they can, these are not complicated scams. So there's a lot of conspiracy theorists who talk about hackers and having complicated scams. You don't have to do that. And why would you bother when you can use the simplest of scams to get massive amounts of information from so many people on social? Consider that access to tech is through work. So Roger's Diffusion of Innovation, for example, in his book, he talks about how the first people to own cell phones were white male executives. many, many years ago. I think it started in like 1973. The cell phones were massive. But these types of things happen in the workplace. And in the time, the workplace was dominated by white men. The tech workplace, anyway, was dominated by men. But work tended to be the place where tech diffused. Social media is a little bit different. Tech now seems to be innovations then went through a phase of education because more and more people are being educated. And so people see education as a way, means to development in many, many countries throughout the world. And as we move to a high participation system at university, people target everything from grade schools. You remember that project that you did that you took home to your parents, or you probably shamed your parents for throwing something in the garbage that they should have recycled? Well, this is a diffusion of innovation. Well, what's changing now is there's a lot of platforms that are diffusing through teenagers, right? And they're saying to their parents, no, I need a cell phone or I'm going to be socially bullied. I need to have this tech or I cannot play in these video games or I cannot be part of this or that social group. And this is very disturbing to me as a parent, as somebody who runs a social media channel, that having access to tech equals social and economic capital. And it also means that tech companies are making rapid innovations and decisions that are having very negative impact on people. So in the textbook, they talk about 50% of employees are sharing content about their work, and this also blurs work, family, and personal lives. So work is now asking you to promote the good of their community, right? And they're sending you home, you're wearing a company t-shirt, you're using the company phone, great, it's free, now it's in your house. And now you're sharing content in your personal Facebook feed, on your personal Twitter feed. You have 2 different feeds. It's all blurred. And I can tell you that Facebook, my personal Facebook account, I need to use that to log into my work account. It is very, very hard to separate those 2 things. And I find that very concerning. But also, I want you to think about electronic word of mouth and the tracking features of wearables, the Internet of Things, tracking of your connections, your follows, your website visits. So even if you're not doing that, voice technology and videos, video technology, whether it be a street camera or whether it be you walking into a store, they know a lot about you if you have your location services turned on. And stores have special tracking devices that don't cost very much. So they know who's walking into the store. When you log on to that free Wi-Fi, you're giving them your information. So it's not technically free. Adoption of voice technology is beyond your control. So whether it's talking to any of your devices, it can be something, your Google Home or Alexa, you're turning something on, it's in your car, right? So these things are pervasive in our community. So human or non-human communication, sometimes it's hard to tell. So when you're in a chat, you want to challenge that chat. You want to say, okay, how am I going to challenge this chat to see if it's an automation or not? So if they're responding to a question and they might say, hello, whatever your name is, they can insert your name. But what is a generic response? And this is a good final exam question. So I might say something like, which one of the above, which one of the following answers are likely a chatbot and which one is likely a human? And how can you tell the difference? So you have to ask, would this response work for any question? And if it would work for any question or any particular person, that's more likely to be a chatbot. How and why do they access me by name? So that is a good question to ask. So are they addressing you by name? Is it just in one particular part of the message they're addressing you by name? Or are they using your name more regularly in the content? So you need to think actively about, what they're sharing. Nielsen suggests that it is more than 11 hours each. We spend more than 11 hours each day reading, listening, watching, and with interaction with media. So that's a big part of our day. And I find that daunting. So hopefully all of you have the opportunity to get out and go for a walk and have legitimate conversations with people, socially distanced, of course, and take time to be healthy and to not constantly feel measured or regulated in some way. Understanding international variations. So as a social media coordinator, I'm constantly looking at how people view social media in their own country, in particular how that impacts them when they come to study at the University of Windsor. So for example, Facebook in Myanmar, a number of people have said they view that as the internet, because in some countries Facebook has made it so that access to the internet is free if you're on Facebook. So they view Facebook as sort of the plumbing of the internet. But we've seen unintended consequences in Myanmar, and you can click on that link when I share this, where it was a form of modern ethnic cleansing. So Twitter in Japan is one of the major platforms, and it got to be one of the major platforms because they used it to monitor and for emergency communications about the tsunamis. I remember I was presenting about crowdsourcing on the days when the major tsunami happened, and we could watch in real time. It was a very good illustrative example of crowdsourcing in real time. Social media and the right to be forgotten in the European Union. We don't have that in Canada. We don't really have that in the United States, but it has impacted social media platforms who are trying to make way in the European Union. So when a student comes from the European Union to the University of Windsor or any other university for that matter, and they ask to be removed from a platform, they have specific expectations about that. But a lot of this isn't regulated in the same way as it is in the EU. So real-time measurement when you're working in social media is critical for justice. So for example, the federal election is a very good, the federal US election is a very good example of that, where Twitter, for the first time that I've really seen, has really been making many more public efforts to curb misinformation, right on up to the President of the United States. And to be fair, the sitting president has really pushed the envelope of the regulation of media. But also we need to look at this for safety. If somebody in COVID, in a pandemic, I've heard of colleagues who have had their workplaces say that there was a COVID outbreak, people calling them out personally for going to work, people not knowing the complete context, and this constant, what I call trial by hashtag, which is unacceptable in a lot of ways, by calling out specific names, calling people out, and letting public conversation call people out for what they've done. It's not a very kind version of justice, and it is problematic for many, many reasons. So it can leave the safety of the people they're calling out and the safety even of family members who have had nothing to do with what their family member did, and putting them on trial in public, and vigilantes taking action on that. So it can be very dangerous for your personal well-being and your personal safety. Next, we'll talk about real-time evaluation, or they talk about this in the book. The importance of knowing how dashboards look. How does it look natively? How, you should be looking at analytics of your own Twitter feed, analytics of your Facebook feed if you're running a business, analytics for LinkedIn and that type of thing. And oftentimes you don't get to see this unless you're part of a very large platform, and you get more and more analytics the larger your platform gets to be. And you want to develop tight learning cycles. So you need to be checking in on your analytics. You need to have audience support, so people who are kind of rooting for the success of your platform and their personal safety. So are you running the kind of platform that is going to be safe for your community members? And if you are making mistakes, what are you doing to make sure that people remain healthy during that time? Finally, whose job is it to monitor social media? Well, I think it's a lot of people's jobs. So I think the national government does need to play a role. I think regional governments, whether it's provincial or local, also need to play a role. And that is for various reasons. So some matters are matters of national security. Some of them are provincial matters for provincial security because the province regulates health to a certain extent. They regulate or healthcare. They regulate education. And if there's cyber attacks on organizations, are they large international organizations? So organizations need to look out for that. The user, you as a user, if you see something going wrong, you should report it to the platform if it's going to help somebody be safe. Don't just scroll on and be the good Samaritan. Be the person willing to report that and know the reporting mechanisms that you have available to you on each platform. Don't call them out with a hashtag, trial by hashtag, but report it to the platform. Make them take ownership on it. If necessary, report it to the police. I often say that platforms must take responsibility for, what is going on. Non-government organizations, for example, the Center for Humane Technology has kind of taken up the charge of people's safety. These are retired people who used to work for social media platform who have now realized the unintended consequences of the platforms. Internet providers, you have free Wi-Fi, okay, but what are the rules and regulations on that Wi-Fi? Is somebody using that Wi-Fi inappropriately? So if that's in a store or in an organization, you can report it to the organization. What are the applications that you're using? What are the mechanisms for misuse of those applications? What can you afford is oftentimes what you look at, but you need to think about surveillance capitalism. What does that app have access to? And you should be looking at your privacy settings and thinking critically about what those privacy settings allow and how this mixes in with voice technology, the Internet of Things, your location. All of these things come into play. The discussion board questions I'm going to put up revolve around two things. What KPIs should perform the social media strategy at the University of Windsor? So what performance outcomes should we be looking for? Also, I want you to describe the successes and challenges of your social media post and your World Kindness Day activity. Make sure that it's safe for people. And only include people on this activity and tag them if they allow you to tag them. But what should be the key performance? What are the successes and challenges that you had? And I want you to kind of tie this into a key performance goal for this. So, maybe thinking of this as IT for D, right? So IT for development, and maybe the development task is to develop, a kinder, gentler community space online. So thank you for listening. And if you have issues or trouble with anything in the course, please do reach out to me either on Microsoft Teams or by meeting me on Microsoft Teams during office hours or by reaching out to your TAs. I hope you are all keeping well and keeping safe.